Mexicans immigrants running from ICE agents burst into a quiet California diner, hearts pounding, afraid of deportation, only to be saved by an unexpected hero, a black waitress with nothing to gain and everything to lose. In one defiant act, she risked everything to protect strangers. She wasn't an activist. She wasn't famous, just a woman with a conscience and the courage to act when it mattered most. Why did a black woman risk everything for strangers? This is not just about borders, family, or immigration. It's a story about legacy, loyalty, and how one bold act from a black woman who had almost nothing changed everything to save immigrants. Stay tuned and watch the story unfolds. Amara Jenkins was just trying to keep her balance on. Motherhood, rent, bills, the aching fatigue that came from double shifts at El Rancho's, the little Mexican diner tucked between a nail salon and a discount furniture store in a dusty corner of Central California. She'd been working there for 3 years, ever since her daughter Nia started kindergarten. It was just past 10 on a Tuesday morning, and the restaurant was unusually quiet. Only 2 regulars sat by the window, nursing their mugs of weak coffee, and the cook. Then, the first scream pierced the silence. It came from the street, high, sharp, and desperate. Amara paused, cloth in hand, and stepped toward the window. A moment later, the sound of sirens shattered the morning calm, growing louder by the second. Doors slammed, heels pounded pavement, and then came the shouting, English, Spanish, radios crackling. One of the regulars stood up, peered out the glass, and muttered, "Damn, ICE agents." Her heart sank. Outside, a wave of chaos unfurled like a storm rolling in too fast. Amara had seen it happen before, on the news, in stories shared over late-night takeout with friends. But never here, never this close. Then the door burst open. An elderly Mexican man stumbled inside first, breathing hard, one hand gripping the doorframe. Behind him came a woman, maybe in her 50s, her eyes wide with terror. A younger teenage girl followed. They were panting, trembling, disoriented. "Please," the older man begged, his voice barely a whisper. "ICE agents are coming after us. Please hide us. We don't want to get deported." Amara's breath caught. Her instincts flared. She looked at them, saw the fear, the desperation, the humanity. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask why. She simply nodded. "Come with me," she said quickly. She led them through the swinging door into the kitchen, as they pushed through the narrow storage room at the back. There, tucked behind the humming freezer, was a thick wooden door with a rusted latch. It led to a tiny, unfinished basement no one ever used anymore, not since the pipes had gone bad years ago. Amara tugged it open, gesturing them inside. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "Don't move. Don't speak unless I come back." She handed the old man a bottle of water from the pantry shelf, then closed the door and pulled a sack of onions in front of it. Her hands were shaking. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it wanted to escape. She had barely made it back to the dining room when the front door swung open again. This time, it wasn't refugees, it was ICE. 3 agents stepped inside. They wore black vests and hard expressions, radios clipped to their shoulders, guns visible at their hips. One of them stepped forward, tall and pale, with a voice as cold as his eyes. "We're looking for 4 illegals that ran in here," he said. "You see anyone?" Amara didn't flinch. Her mind screamed, her palms sweat, but her face stayed still. She met his stare without blinking. "No," she said, her voice calm. "Nobody came in." The agent stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne under the body armor. "You sure about that? Lying to federal officers is a crime." "I said what I said," Amara replied. "Nobody came in." There was a long, tense pause. Then he gestured to his team. "Search it." They fanned out, heading for the kitchen. Cabinets slammed open. The pantry was ransacked. Carlos stepped aside nervously as one of them opened the freezer and shone a flashlight inside. Amara stood by the counter, watching everything, forcing her feet not to move, her hands not to tremble. Every second stretched longer than the last. They didn't find the basement door. After nearly 10 minutes, the agents regrouped by the entrance. The leader shot her one last look, something between suspicion and disappointment. Then muttered into his radio and turned to leave. The door closed behind them. Amara didn't move for several moments. Then she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her knees weakened, but she kept herself upright. When the restaurant was quiet again, she turned and walked back toward the kitchen, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Amara stood in the kitchen doorway, staring blankly at the spot where the ICE agents had stood just moments ago. Her breath was still shallow, as though her lungs hadn't caught up with the fact that the danger had passed. Amara turned toward the freezer, her limbs heavy, her heart still beating harder than it should. She moved the sack of onions, fingers fumbling with the latch on the hidden basement door. It creaked open slowly, revealing 4 pairs of wide eyes blinking back at her from the shadows. "It's safe," she whispered. "They're gone." The elderly man was the first to climb out. He moved slowly, each step labored, like his bones had absorbed the fear. The older woman followed. The young teenage girl, who hadn't spoken once, brought up the rear, glancing over her shoulder with each step. They emerged into the storeroom like ghosts returning from the grave. None of them said a word at first. Amara handed them each a glass of water and waited. She didn't push them to speak, didn't ask their names. She knew better than to pry. Their survival had depended on her silence, and now she offered them the dignity of their own stories. The elderly man finally broke the stillness. His voice was raw, rasping with emotion. "You saved our lives," he said. I don't have words." Amara shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should have done." "No," he said, more firmly this time. His eyes shone with tears. "Most people would have turned away. You didn't even ask who we were." He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his worn coat. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled something out, small, weathered, and soft from years of being handled. A photograph. The edges were frayed. The colors faded. But the face on it was sharp, youthful, full of hope. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, with big eyes and a crooked grin. He wore a blue shirt and clutched a toy truck in his hand. Amara leaned in, drawn by something she couldn't explain. "This is my son," the old man said, his voice breaking on the word. "Julian. They took him when he was small, after we crossed the border. I had asylum. I did everything the right way. But one mistake, one missed court date, and they called me illegal. They sent me to one detention center. My boy was sent to another. I haven't seen him since." Amara's throat tightened. "You never found him?" He shook his head. "I've searched for years. Asked everyone. Showed this photo to strangers. I stay at shelters now, just in case someone might recognize his face. I know it's foolish. He's a man now. He probably forgot all about me. But I can't stop." The older woman beside him placed a gentle hand on his arm, her eyes full of quiet grief. "I'm not undocumented," the man added softly. "I just got lost in the system. Left behind. It happens more than people think." Amara didn't speak. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound too small for the weight of his pain. She stared at the photo, imagining the little boy with the truck, wondering how many stories like his were buried beneath headlines and political arguments. He tucked the picture back into his coat. "We'll go now," he said. "We can't stay long anywhere. But I wanted you to know what you did today wasn't just saving lives. You gave me hope again." None of them asked for food or money. It didn't linger. There was a quiet dignity in the way they moved, grateful, but aware they could not afford to be seen. At the door, the elderly man turned back once more. "If you ever see him," he said, "tell him I never stopped looking." Amara nodded, her chest tight, and then they were gone, slipping out into the morning light that had returned to the street, leaving behind only echoes of the truth they carried and the quiet imprint of a story Amara didn't yet realize she'd become part of. Julian Herrera, a tech millionaire, but also the son of an immigrant. He is very successful and wealthy, but could not find true happiness. Ever since he was separated from his immigrant dad at childhood, he had tried to find him, but to no avail. No amount of coding brilliance or IPO riches could stitch together what had been torn apart. It was the one thing he could never hack, solve, or build over, The emptiness of not knowing what had become of his father who had held his hand so tightly the night they crossed the border and let go too soon. On this faithful day, he sat in his office, scrolling through social media during a break, more out of reflex than interest. The news feed blurred past, trending hashtags, another celebrity breakup, political noise, until something caught his eye, a shaky video, vertical, someone's cell phone footage. He tapped the volume up. Sirens, screams, Spanish voices crying out. Uniformed ICE agents moving in swift, rigid lines through a neighborhood that looked like 100 others across California. Julian almost kept scrolling, assuming it was just another reminder of the country's fractured soul. But then, a man, in the background. Just for a second, Julian's thumb froze. His eyes narrowed. He dragged the video back a few seconds, paused. The man was older. Gray had taken over his once black hair. His back was slightly hunched. His face turned halfway toward the camera, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, caught mid-movement as if running or ducking. Julian's heart knocked against his ribs. He leaned closer to the screen, pinching to zoom. The image pixelated, but the features were still there. The curve of the jaw, the nose, the way one eyebrow arched slightly higher than the other. A face half-etched into memory, half-forgotten with time, but never truly lost. "Dad," Julian whispered. The sound of his own voice in the still room startled him. It had come out like a gasp, involuntary, raw. He stared at the frame again, his breath shallow. Logic tried to wrestle control. It could be anyone. Don't get your hopes up. But hope had already bolted ahead, wild and unstoppable. Memories broke loose like floodwaters. A dark, crowded van. His father's strong hand gripping his. The sharp sting of flashlights. That last time he saw his father's face, pressed against a barred window, eyes locked with his as guards pulled them apart. Julian had screamed, clutched at the air, but it was over in an instant. Just like that, the world became a place with no answers. He had searched over the years, asked officials, hired private investigators, combed shelter records, but nothing stuck. It was like his father had vanished into a bureaucratic void. But now there was this. He snapped a screenshot, saved the video, then stood up so fast his chair rolled back and bumped the glass wall. His assistant's voice buzzed on the intercom. "Mr. Herrera? You're 1 p.m. with investors." "Cancel it," he said. "Reschedule everything." There was a pause. "All of it, sir. All of it." He grabbed his jacket and keys, his mind already racing ahead. He didn't have a plan, just a location tag from the video and a thread of desperate instinct. But it was enough. Julian Herrera, whose calendar was usually booked down to the minute, whose boardroom saw billion-dollar decisions made in quiet tones, was already in the elevator before anyone could ask why. He didn't know what he'd find, but he knew where he had to go, and he knew he couldn't wait another day. Julian Herrera's car tore down the freeway, sun blazing across the windshield as palm trees blurred into streaks of green. He had turned off the GPS an hour ago. All he had now was the shaky video saved to his phone and a location tag from the post, just a neighborhood name and a date. But that was enough. His suit jacket had been thrown into the back seat hours earlier. The sleeves of his pressed white shirt were rolled to his elbows and the top buttons undone. He hadn't shaved, hadn't eaten, hadn't checked a single email. His assistant had called 3 times. He ignored all of them. This wasn't business. This was blood. He pulled in the first gas station on the edge of town, a dusty spot with sun-faded signs and peeling paint. Inside, the cashier, a young man with tired eyes and earbuds in, barely looked up when Julian stepped in. "Hey," Julian said, already holding up his phone. "I'm looking for someone. I think he passed through here during the ICE raid a few days ago." He played the video, zoomed in on the man's face. The clerk blinked, leaned a little closer, then shook his head. "Sully, man, looks familiar, but I couldn't say for sure. A lot of folks been through here scared." Julian nodded, already backing out the door. From there, he stopped at every corner market, every bus bench, every alley where a cluster of people gathered under shade. He showed the video to taco vendors, to women sweeping in front of laundromats, to an old man whittling a stick beneath a rusted awning. All gave him the same soft, apologetic shrug. The trail grew colder by the hour. Still, Julian pressed on. By late afternoon, he found himself on a side street, where a weathered sign that read El Ranchos hung loosely above a cracked wooden door. The restaurant looked tired, the paint faded to a dull orange, the lettering curling at the edges. He almost didn't go in, but something in him said try. The bell above the door gave a half-hearted jingle as he stepped inside. It was nearly empty. A lone table near the back held 2 quiet customers, and behind the counter stood a woman, tall, with dark brown skin, her hair pulled back into a tired bun. She wore an apron streaked with flour and salsa, and her eyes looked like they'd seen more than a day's worth of trouble. She barely looked up as he approached. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but guarded. Julian placed his phone on the counter, the video already queued up. "I'm looking for someone," he said. "This man, do you know him?" She didn't move right away. Her eyes stayed on the screen as the video played, her brows drawing together slightly. Then, just as the face appeared, her hand came to rest on the counter's edge. She leaned in, a breath caught in her throat. "That's him," she said quietly. "I hit him here." Julian felt his pulse surge. "What? You're sure?" "I'd never forget that face," she said, eyes still on the phone. "He came in with 3 others. Scared. Running. I put them in the basement behind the freezer before the agents came." Julian's throat went dry. Where did he go? The woman finally looked up at him, really looked at him, and something in her gaze shifted. Maybe it was recognition, or maybe just the weight of his urgency. She pointed toward the door with a nod. "There's a shelter 2 streets down, behind the church. He said he was staying there. That's all I know." Julian backed away, already turning. "Thank you. You don't know what this means to me." She nodded slowly, watching him like she wasn't quite sure what to make of this sharp-dressed stranger who'd come in looking like he hadn't slept, eyes wild with hope. As he pushed through the door and disappeared back into the sunlight, Amara remained still behind the counter, one hand resting gently on the spot where the phone had been. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he was going or why he looked so shaken, but something told her she hadn't seen the last of him. The shelter sat at the edge of the block, quiet and unassuming behind a whitewashed fence and a garden that looked more hopeful than kept. A hand-painted sign read St. Mark's Refuge Center, its letters faded by sun and time. Julian pulled up and parked without turning off the engine. For a few seconds, he just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. What if it wasn't him? What if the video had lied, or memory had? But something deeper than doubt told him otherwise. He stepped out and approached the entrance, pushing open the glass door that buzzed faintly with an old chime. Inside, the scent of coffee, old newspapers, and the faint smell of bleach greeted him. A fan oscillated slowly in the corner. Rows of worn chairs lined the walls, and people sat scattered, some dozing, some staring into space, some holding conversations too quiet to follow. Julian's eyes swept the room, moving too fast to process each face. Then he froze. In the corner, sitting alone with a cup of coffee clasped gently between weathered hands, was a man who looked like time had pressed on him too hard. His hair was grayer now, his shoulders stooped. His clothes were clean but threadbare. But the face, Julian would have known it in any lifetime. "Dad," he breathed. The man didn't hear him at first. Julian stepped forward louder this time. "Dad!" The old man looked up, confused at first. His eyes, dull with years of disappointment, blinked in disbelief. Then they widened, his mouth parted, and the cup in his hand trembled. "Julian," he whispered. Julian didn't wait. He dropped to his knees in front of him and threw his arms around his father's frail frame. Their embrace drew the attention of every soul in the room. Heads turned. Conversation stopped, but no one said a word. The 2 men clung to each other like survivors pulled from wreckage. Julian's shoulders shook with sobs he didn't try to hide. His father's hands gripped him as though afraid that letting go would send him vanishing again. "You found me," the man said, over and over, voice thick and broken. "After all these years, you found me." Julian nodded against his shoulder. I never stopped looking. I swear. I searched everywhere. Tears streamed down his father's face. I thought they told you I was dead. No, Julian said, pulling back just enough to look him in the eyes. I always knew you were out there. I just didn't know where. People around them wiped at their own eyes. A young woman seated nearby murmured softly, Dios mío. They sat together for a long time, not caring who watched, not caring that this reunion was happening in a room that smelled of damp floors and second chances. It was sacred all the same. Eventually, Julian helped his father to his feet and brought him to a quieter corner. He grabbed 2 waters from the small fridge, and they sat side by side. His father's voice was steadier now, though still laced with wonder. You have no idea what I've been through. After they separated us, they never let me call anyone. I bounced between centers. When I was finally released, I had nothing. No address. No documents. I didn't even know if you were still in the country. Julian nodded. They sent me to a foster system. It was rough, but I always remembered your face. That last moment, I held on to that photo of you, his father said, reaching into his coat pocket like he had done 1,000 times before. But his fingers stopped. I must have left it somewhere. Julian smiled gently. You don't need it now. His father looked at him again, the awe still not worn off. There's something you should know. I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for someone else. Julian tilted his head. What do you mean? There was a woman. A waitress. A black woman, strong, kind. She didn't ask questions. Just hit me when ICE came. If she hadn't, I wouldn't be here. Julian blinked slowly. You remember where? His father nodded. Small restaurant. Called El Rancho's. Julian stood immediately. Then I have to go back. I have to thank her. The old man smiled. You should. She saved more than just me. She saved our moment. Julian helped him up again, and together they stepped out of the shelter into the light that suddenly felt warmer than it had in years. The restaurant, once filled with the clatter of dishes and the aroma of sizzling onions, now sat in quiet retreat. Only one table was occupied, a couple whispering over empty coffee mugs. Behind the counter stood Amara, her apron still tied neatly at her waist, though the day's weight sagged heavily on her shoulders. Her hands were folded over a rag she'd stopped using 30 minutes ago. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry now, past the point of fresh grief. In front of her stood the owner, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a pained look that couldn't quite meet her gaze. I'm sorry, Amara, he was saying. I've tried everything. The numbers don't work anymore. Between rent and the fines, I can't keep this place afloat. I'm selling, and I have to let everyone go. She didn't argue. She just nodded as though she had always known this day would come. Maybe not now, but soon. El Rancho's had been bleeding quietly for a while. She had only hoped it would last a little longer. At least until school let out. At least until she caught up on bills. But life rarely waited for a convenient time to crumble. The door opened again. She barely looked up. Another goodbye, perhaps, or was someone unaware of the news. But then a man stepped forward and paused. He was tall, with carefully pressed clothes and a calm, focused expression. She didn't recognize him at first. He stepped aside, and then a second figure entered. And just like that, everything around her seemed to fall away. Her eyes locked onto the older man as he crossed the floor slowly, one step at a time, like every footfall meant something. His face was unmistakable, his jawline, the eyes that had stared at her through fear and gratitude in that tiny freezer room. The man she had hidden in the basement. Señor, she whispered. The man smiled through the tears already forming in his eyes. You, he said, voice thick with emotion. You saved me. She blinked rapidly, a lump forming in her throat. You made it out. I did. Because of you. Julian stepped forward now, his presence measured but electric. My name is Julian Herrera, he said. This man is my father. Amara gasped. The connection struck her like a bell. She looked between the two men, stunned. I've been searching for him for years, Julian continued. And if it weren't for what you did, I might never have found him again. She shook her head, voice trembling. I only did what anyone would have done. No, Julian said, his voice firm. You did what few would have dared. He turned now, slowly, to face the stunned restaurant owner. "You said this place is for sale?" The man nodded, bewildered. "Ah, yes, that's right, but we haven't listed it yet." Julian reached into his coat pocket, pulling out his phone and a leather wallet. "How much?" The owner blinked. "Excuse me, I want to buy it," Julian said simply. "Right now. Name your price." The room went quiet. Amara stared at him, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "You want to buy El Ranchos?" Julian turned to her, a small smile playing at his lips. "No," he said. "I want you to have it." She took a step back, stunned. "What?" "You saved my father's life," he said. "Let me change yours." Her hand flew to her chest, her breath catching. Her knees buckled slightly, but she didn't fall. She just stood there, as if afraid that any movement might shatter the moment. The owner, after a long pause, simply nodded. "We could draw up the paperwork." "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious," Julian said. The deal didn't take long. It was as if the universe had finally aligned, just for her. Amara stood outside the restaurant an hour later, a fresh set of keys clutched tightly in her hand. Her daughter Nia ran into her arms, her laughter echoing in the empty lot, unaware of how the ground beneath them had just shifted. Amara held her close, tears falling freely now. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a mountain she had to climb alone. It felt like possibility. And it all began with a choice she'd made when no one was watching. If this story touched your heart, like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful, soul-touching stories that restore faith in humanity.